talk about Stress Assess this morning, and it's a tool that measures stress in your workplace, and we're going to talk about how to use it and how to prevent stress. So first of all, how does stress fit into ergonomics? Ergonomics is all about the interface between the worker and the workplace, and you might think that stress doesn't have anything to do with it, but stress is the context in which that interface takes place. So it's actually a very important part of ergonomics. And if you look at the list of domains that the Association for Canadian Ergonomists, I got it right? Okay, put on their website, you can see that almost 3/4 of the items in this map here showed some relationship to psychosocial factors. And also in Ontario here, we have just recently had a change in our law for compensation, and chronic stress is now recognized as an occupational disease. And this is something new here in Ontario, although in other provinces it has been like that already. BC and Quebec, for instance, have recognized chronic stress in their compensation and health and safety legislation. Manitoba, in the purpose of its act, going back a couple decades already, says the purpose of the Health and Safety Act is to promote and maintain the highest degree of physical, mental, and social well-being of workers. So psychosocial is in there already. Alberta's recent Bill 30 also defines health and safety as including physical, psychological, and social well-being. And the new Bill C-65 in the federal jurisdiction, which is at its first reading, it's not passed yet, says the whole purpose of the bill is to prevent accidents and physical or psychological injuries and illnesses arising out of, linked with, or occurring in the course of employment. So more and more jurisdictions are recognizing that it's not just physical health and safety, but psychological health and safety is part of that. And the changes in Ontario were actually prompted because the Compensation Act was found to be in violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which says you can't discriminate between physical and mental health. And so that's why the changes are happening. Now, in the European Union, this has been the case for many years. Back in '89 already, they had a legislation that covered the organization of work and social relationships at work. Now, it took a while for them to implement it, and even in 1999, they had specific goals, but they were very generic. And these generic goals were not, people didn't really take them too seriously. And so in the last few years, 5 to 10 years, a lot of the countries in Europe have been requiring quantitative psychosocial risk assessments, which means you have to measure the stress in the workplace using usually surveys. And in some countries, you even have to demonstrate that you fix the problem quantitatively. In France, for instance, if you find a problem, you have to redo the survey and show that you fix the problem. And in 2012, in the EU, all the ministries of health or labor did an enforcement blitz on psychosocial risk assessment in workplaces. So that in Chile, for instance, everyone has to use a survey to assess stress in the workplace. It's also that case in Brazil, and I think is it Paraguay or Bolivia? I can't remember. But there are many countries in the world where it is now mandatory to do a quantitative assessment of psychosocial risks. So here in North America, we're actually way behind what's happening in the rest of the world. In Australia, compensation for stress is the second most common cost in compensation after material handling accidents. The economic burden of stress in the workplace in Canada is estimated to be $51 billion. I would guess that's even a better business case than for doing ergonomics changes to the workplace. So. Now, when we look at stress in the workplace, it really depends where you're coming from when you're looking for solutions. If you're looking at it from a perspective from psychology, what you're doing is you're focusing in what's going on in people's heads, what's happening between their ears. And so the solutions to your problems are trying to change what's going on in people's heads. Now, the psychosocial approach looks at not only what's going on in your head, but what's going on in other people's heads and how the environment interacts with all that. And so it's a more holistic approach. And the solutions, therefore, are more holistic. So when all you have is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. So if you're just looking at it from psychology perspective, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create resilient employees, improve their coping skills. You're trying to apply cognitive behavioral therapy to the individuals, or mindfulness to help people relax and manage the stress. You're not really looking at the cause of the stress. So I want to talk about prevention at 3 levels. Primary prevention, just like health and safety, you have at the source, along the path, and at the worker. Well, here, primary prevention is kind of like at the source. That's when you change things in the way the job is designed, the way the organization has set itself up, flexibility. You can make changes to collective agreements through health and safety committees or policies and programs. At the secondary level, what you're trying to do is get people to realize the early signs of stress so they can recognize when it's starting to happen to them, and they can develop coping skills. You can also do early screening. Wellness programs also help. Tertiary prevention is helping those people who have problems. So if people have mental disorders in the workplace, getting them to get help, and also getting them support in getting back in the workplace. Now, the old adage is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and we want to apply that also. The further you go to primary prevention, the better off you are, obviously. So putting that primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention on this continuum of typical health and safety hazards, where you have a source, a path, an exposure, uptake, and a biological change, you can see that applying it to psychosocial, we have the source as the attitude or the culture in the workplace. The path is how we can redesign things in the workplace to make things flow easier, to improve relationships and things like that. Exposure is usually relying on an individual to report that they're stressed. Uptake, early signs of stress you can pick up through surveys. And biological change, that's when you have mental disorder, and perhaps you get compensation for that. So in Ontario, we have a bill, 132, that looks at violence and harassment in the workplace, but it's fully premised on having people report an occurrence. So you don't really have a problem until somebody reports that there is a problem happening. Now, the OSHCO has a nice format online which helps workplaces redesign the workplace to minimize the potential for violence and harassment in the workplace. Like if you have, for instance, angry clients, you can put up barriers between the person taking the information and that. You can institute zero tolerance for abuse of your intake workers and things like that. And there's a lot of good ideas in that. But really what we want to do is get even further back to the source. You know, what is causing the problem? We want to be, instead of waiting for people to complain about, harassment and that, you want people to be hazard-based, not complaint-based. Okay, we can split these levels of prevention also into 2 dimensions of individual and also organizational. So individual, it's looking at coping skills and appraisal skills. Secondary is wellness. Tertiary is getting counseling. At the organizational level, you can set up EAP programs, return to work, accommodations, or you can do mental health first aid. Has anyone taken mental health first aid here? Oh, quite a few people. Well, that's great. A few years ago when I was asking, people were looking, what's that? What's that? It's just like, it's a 2-day course which helps you respond to people who are in acute anxiety or depression or some type of manic episode or something. And it lets you, it demystifies it so you understand what's going on with the person, and often people feel uneasy and don't know what to do when somebody has a problem and they're telling them about it. So this gets you over that hump. However, you know, if you use the analogy with safety, if you have a lot of accidents in your workplace, the solution isn't necessarily to train more first aiders, right? So it's not the most desirable, but it really works well for raising awareness in the workplace. But what we find is often missing is primary prevention at the organizational level. That people are not thinking about how to change the culture and the climate and the work structure and organization. They're more thinking about how to change what's happening between people's ears rather than what's in the environment. So how would you go about measuring chronic stress? Well, Deming has a lot, he's a business guru, and he basically said if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. However, if you do read his book, you'll find out there are certain things that you can't measure, and some of those things that you can't measure are very important. I use the example of Valentine's Day. I'm a bit of a statistician, and on Valentine's Day, my wife asked me, "How much do you love me?" And I say, well, about 95% of the time, plus or minus 2 standard deviations. And guess what? I'm in the doghouse. It's all or nothing. So certain things you just don't measure, but they're very important. The other issue is objective and subjective measures. For some reason, when it comes to stress, people are suspicious of what we say ourselves about our stress. But where's the stress happening? You know, in here. And who's the only one who, you know, you can't take an x-ray, you can't take a blood sample, you know, you have to ask questions. And in fact, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, which is the Bible for diagnosing different psychological conditions, which is the gold standard, is all completely based on asking questions. There's no x-rays, no blood tests, or anything like that. And here's an example for depression. If you have 5 of these 9 symptoms and your life has drastically been altered by those symptoms in the last month or 2, then you get a clinical diagnosis of depression, and then you're eligible for counseling and medication and that type of thing. So it is questions about how you're feeling that is the objective way of diagnosing depression. So the Mental Injury Tool Group is a group of stakeholders from OCAL that got together and wanted to create tools to help people like you change workplaces to make them better. And we looked at a number of topics, indoor air quality, ergonomics, and whatever. But the one thing that the group said is, we have tools for all those other things, but every time our members call us and say, you know, we're dealing with a stress problem, we have nothing we can give them. You know, we can be sympathetic and listen to them, but so they decided that they want to develop a tool to help workplaces measure the stress in the workplace. So after a lot of looking at different surveys, we came up with the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire, or COPSUC for short. And this survey measures the following items: work demands, We have 3 work demands: quantitative, work pace, emotional demands. Then work organization, its influence, possibilities for development, how meaningful your work is, how committed you are to your workplace. Workplace relationships, we have predictability, whether you have enough information to be able to do your job, whether you're in the know. Recognition, role clarity, leadership, supervisor support, colleague support, role conflicts. And workplace values. In Europe, this is called social capital. It's the vertical trust. It's the trust between management and workers. And it's the justice and respect that things are resolved fairly, that the work's distributed fairly. If you have strong social capital, your organization is usually fairly successful. If you have weak, your organization is probably struggling. Then there are job and employment factors: insecure job, unstable workload, job satisfaction, work-life conflict. And then we also include offensive behaviors, undesired sexual attention, threats of violence, physical violence, and bullying. Now, in Canada, we have a standard, the CSA standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And it cites 13 different factors, plus another one called others identified by workers. And the question we're often asked is, does our tool actually fit with that? And you probably can't see this in detail, but you can download it and have a look at it. But the bottom line is, yes, we not only satisfy all those 13 factors, we even have extra ones. We have a whole list of items that were identified by workers that weren't in the COPSUC questionnaire that we added to it. And also, the COPSUC questionnaire has health outcomes associated with it, which a lot of other surveys don't have. So, yes, we have everything, plus we have more. And we took this survey and we sent it. We hired a polling company, and they sent it across Canada to over 4,000 working Canadians, and they filled out our questionnaire. And so that's what we use to compare your results to. And here is an example of the question about whether or not people in the last year have experienced undesired sexual attention. And here it's broken down by economic sectors, and you can see that the retail trade and accommodation and food services are the 2 highest areas with undesired sexual attention. And just as a comparison, this survey originated in Copenhagen in Denmark, and so we have data from Denmark to compare Canadian data with, and so it shows a bit how the cultures compare. And in Denmark, the average, is 2.9%, so 3%. So you can see the difference in the Canadian culture and the Danish culture when it comes to undesired sexual attention. Physical violence, the number 1 sector with physical violence is healthcare and social assistance. 22% of the people there have experienced some type of violence in the last year. Followed closely by, 15% in educational service. And again, if you compare that to Denmark, there it's about 4%. So we only have really one economic sector that's less than what's in the average in Denmark, and that's the professional, scientific, and technical services. I think I'm in that one. Now, when we come to bullying, this will be interesting for the Sudbury audience because mining came out as the number 1, and heads further than any other sector, 46%. The other bunch, we have healthcare, accommodation, and food services, and public administration at around 36%. And anyone want to guess here in Sudbury what the level in Denmark would be? It's 8%. But so you can see that's in Canada even, in English-speaking Canada, the average is 34%. In French-speaking, which is almost all Quebec, it's 20%. There is a big difference in culture in the acceptability of bullying. And in Europe, often you find that bullying is seen as antisocial behavior and frowned upon, whereas, right now in the States, we've elected, or they've elected somebody who, embodies that attitude. So we've also done the scientific requirements to show validity and reliability of the survey, and that is going to be published soon. We're publishing it jointly with 6 or 7 other countries that simultaneously did tests on the reliability and the validity in their languages too. So this will be the first survey ever validated simultaneously in about 7 languages. We have a website that has a number of tools. We have guides, we have this access to the survey, we have videos and posters. We have an app. We've had about 5,000 downloads. We're about to update the app. I think May 1st is our target date for updating the app. And we also have a webinar, and this will be online too, so you can watch this. What our new item that we've launched is our Stress Assess website, and it's a website that allows you to administer the survey yourself. And this is what it looks like. You can do it 2 ways. You can do a personal edition, which you just log in and fill it out, and it tells you what your results are. It tells you how you compare to the Canadian averages from that survey I just talked about. It also gives you ideas for any area that you're concerned about. If you're high on quantitative demands, there's about 7 ideas on how you can reduce your quantitative demands. The other side is the workplace edition, and with this, you need to log in and set up an account, and you can create a questionnaire for your workplace. And once you've set it up, you get a link that you can circulate in your workplace. People fill it out online, and then when you close the survey, you get an automatic report that you can evaluate your workplace. And however, we've made the step of assessing workplace stress very easy, but we want to really remind people that you need to do a lot of organization and learning before you step into that. Just because you can circulate a survey doesn't mean you should right away. You need to think about it and plan ahead of time. So we learned the hard way to use this 5-step process. The first step being learn, the second step getting your ducks in a row, organizing, then assessing, then you make the change, and then you evaluate. And then once you evaluate, you learn something new, and you can go around this continual improvement circle again. There's a wizard also that walks you through the steps: preparing, announcing, creating, building, and then launching, deploying, reminders, monitoring. This is what the monitor looks like. It's a dashboard, and you can see how many people have completed the survey, and it rates what your response rate is. We're aiming for usually something over 80%. And then you get the results in graphs like this. And this is the comparison of your results to the Canadian average. I actually have, how many people here filled out the survey online? Okay. And I had, the PDF of the results. Okay, so these are your results. Now, not everything worked in my spreadsheet because I have a computer here that has an old version of Excel. But here, white means you're no different than the Canadian average. Green means you're better. Yellow means you're not as good as the Canadian average, and orange and red is worse, and light blue is much better. So for accommodation for outside responsibilities, your responses were better, but for adequate staffing levels, they were worse. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, here are some of the demographics. You can see that roughly 2/3 of you were non-management and 1/3 management. Only about 20% male, over 80% female. The average age between 40 and 49. How do I page down? Okay. Adequate staffing levels. You'll see that over half people agreed or disagreed or strongly disagreed that there were adequate staffing levels in their organization, and that's an important point. Also, resources. About over 1/3 felt that the organization didn't have enough resources to do the job the way it should be done. Job security for you folks is very good. How do I want to go page down? Okay, here are some of the health and safety issues. It's interesting, the one that's worse than the Canadian average is ergonomics. Everything else is better, so that's kind of appropriate. Next one. This is the workplace factors, and most of them are white. So you can tell that this group is fairly typical of the Canadian average. Now, being the Canadian average, remember that the average Canadian costs $51 billion to the Canadian economy in stress. So just being average is not necessarily good. The positive things that we have is job security and the lack of role conflicts, but the negative one, the yellow one, is quantitative demands. Next one. Okay, now I want to scroll down quite a few. Can I have control? Okay, it's working. Yeah, okay. Okay, for okay, down one. Okay, there. For offensive behaviors, you're generally lower than the Canadian average. For bullying, for instance, is 28%, whereas the Canadian average, if you combine the French and English, is 31%. The next one. The next one, please. For vicarious offensive behaviors, that's a question where we ask if you're not the victim of the offensive behavior, but you're seeing it happening in your workplace. And research has shown that people who witness it also have health effects because they feel powerless. Often they feel guilty because they're not standing up for their fellow workers. So that one is almost 40% there. Next one. And what this graph show, let's take, for instance, the vicarious offensive behaviors. You see that for people who don't see vicarious offensive behaviors in the workplace, the blue line, their average symptom score is 37. But for people who see managers doing any of these offensive behaviors, their symptom score is 51.7%. So you can see that just witnessing, and it's worse from managers than from colleagues. From colleagues it's 45, and from colleagues it's 40, and from clients it's 45. So this report gives you an idea of what type of, or the source, where the source is coming from and how that's affecting people. The next one. This is a correlation matrix which shows the symptoms along the top, for instance, burnout, and which risk factors are most associated. It's called a heat map. So the stronger, the more pluses, the stronger the association. So burnout is associated strongly with quantitative demands and emotional demands, and also stress symptoms with those two. And the positive ones, the green and the blue, for instance, recognition and rewards is positively associated with engagement and job satisfaction. So there's a lot you can pick up. The next one, and then next one. And the top 3 issues for the people who responded, and we had over 200 people respond, was quantitative demands. And so here are a couple ideas on how to reduce quantitative demands, emotional demands, and also workplace has not enough resources. And I haven't got a list of how to solve that problem yet. Okay, if you want to go back to the slideshow. Now, if you're really interested in doing the survey, it's important to do a lot of planning ahead of time, get a lot of people involved. You can't solve the stress problem for other people. Everybody has to work together on it. And to do a survey and get 80% response takes a lot of work. And there's a 450-page book by Don Dillman that describes how to get a good response rate. However, I've summarized it in 5 points. So first of all, tell people what you're going to do ahead of time. Let them know ahead of time that, and also let them know that everybody's on board and you're going to do something about this. Next, distribute the survey. Put pizza in the lunchroom just so you get people's attention that, hey, something special is happening. A week or 2 later, send out a reminder saying thanks if you filled it out. If not, friendly reminder, please do it. After another week or 2, you send a more urgent reminder. If you've done it, thanks. But if you haven't, this is really important. We really want your input, so please. And then the last 5th, you say, okay, we're going to wind it up here. If you've done it, fine, thanks. But if you haven't, please, please, please. And you may want to send people out on the shop floor and start nagging people in order to get it. But if you have dedicated people in every department who are willing to nag people, you can get 80%, but without doing that extra work, it's pretty hard to do. Now, the response rate, if you get 80%, the other 20% who didn't respond, they won't change the results. So you can pleasantly ignore them. You've got representative response. But if you're less than 50%, let's say you only have 30%, what do? Throw up your hands and walk away? Well, you don't have to. You can't say that the representative. Obviously, you've got a subgroup. We don't know if they're the complainers or they're the happy people or they're just a random bunch who happen to see the survey. So we don't know why the other 70% didn't respond. But we do know that if we fix the problem of those 30%, the other 70% won't be harmed by it. They may even benefit by it. So as long as you don't say, we have X% of people in this workplace who have this problem, because you can't say that if you've only got 30%. You just say, we have a bunch of people with this problem, and we want to try to solve it, and go ahead and solve it, and I'm sure everybody will benefit from it. Sample size. We've done the survey in workplaces as small as 6, but if you're less than 15, the results are really unstable. If you got more than 50, it works a whole lot better. But you don't want to lump too much because, for instance, in a hospital, if you've got an operating room where there's a real good team, they work together great, and everybody's happy and everything. And then you got the emergency room where everybody's backbiting and fighting and things like that. So I got a really challenging department and an excellent department. And if I do lump them together, what happens? I get one mediocre result. And I don't see the weaknesses here or the, lots of weaknesses, and the strengths over here. And so it's important. You can always lump later on, but you can't split later on. So you need to design your surveys so it's you've split enough, but if you get too few responses in a department, you might want to start lumping them together. Now, once you've done the survey and find out what your problems are, how do you start finding solutions to your problems? You can pick factors, but should you start with the top issue? Let's say the top issue is a lack of trust. Or do you want to start with something else like ergonomics or something easier to deal with? So you got to look at your own resources, what your strengths of your committee are, and figure out where you want to start. It's best, again, not to work alone. Get a representative steering committee, and it's a conversation. It's not like health and safety where somebody has blocked the fire extinguisher, and so you move it and you solve the problem. No, this is something that needs to be worked on an ongoing basis, because as soon as you let it go, it may slip. So who's qualified to do this? Well, Jacques Melchior in Belgium put together this acronym called SOBANE, and it stands for Screening, Observation, Analysis, and Expertise. And by screening, he meant this is when workers identify problems in their workplace. Now, how many of you do you think could identify psychosocial hazards in your workplace? Well, everybody can. If you got too much workload, you know it. If there's backbiting going on, you know it. So identifying hazards in psychosocial field is not hard to do, and workers are very reliable sources of finding it out. Melchior says that 60% of the problems identified at the screening level should be able to be solved at that level. So most of the problems you can find solutions for. Now, if you need help, the next level up is observation, and that's when you do these surveys and things like that in the health and safety, or you got a steering committee or supervisors at that level, and another 25% of problems can be solved there. So between those two levels, you should be able to solve 85% of your problems, or identify them at least, maybe not solve. Now, if you can't, if these two levels get stuck, the next level up is analysis. In Europe, there's a discipline called work organizational specialist, which is a master's level, the same as a hygienist or an ergonomist or a safety professional. And they go around and deal with these things. We don't have these people here in Canada. And I think most of the people who do it at this level are psychologists. But they would also be able to help if the other two levels can't deal with the problem. However, it's a small percentage, maybe 10% of the problems that need that level of expertise. And if they get stuck, then you need a super expert, but that's very rare. The idea behind this is that the problem gets defined at the screening level. So in hygiene, for instance, people say at the screening level, the air is bad. And then once you bump it up to the analysis level, the hygienist comes in and says, oh, there's carbon monoxide here. Okay, I'll measure the carbon monoxide. No, the carbon monoxide is fine. You don't have a problem anymore. Well, that's not the issue. The issue was there was something in the air that was making people feel bad. It wasn't whether or not the carbon monoxide levels were at regulated levels or not. So the problem needs to be defined at the screening level, and the other levels are there to support the people on the shop floor in solving their problems. So who's qualified? Everybody's qualified. You can do a lot. You may not be able to do everything, and you may need some help, but my suggestion is that you probably know what the problems in your workplace are, and you probably have a lot of good ideas on how to resolve them. Plus, there are a lot of resources online that you can come up with new ideas. So some changes are really easy and obvious, especially from hindsight. There's more efficient ways of organizing the work, more flexibility, creative problem solving. Often the problem is having permission to do that. And some changes are very difficult, changing attitudes, personalities, getting respect, and things like that. The interesting thing is a lot of these changes, unlike ergonomics and hygiene, are very cheap to implement. Improving respect in the workplace is free. It just costs somebody's pride, which sometimes is worth more than expensive things. So sometimes it's very hard, and it takes a lot of pressure to take that lump of coal and make a diamond out of it. Now, structures, organization, culture can encourage some attitudes and discourage others. So just because you're trying to deal with something difficult like attitudes doesn't mean that you can make changes in the organization, in the structure, that will encourage or discourage them. So the trick is to design the environment such that these attitudes are stifled and positive attitudes are encouraged. Now, there's a document online that's for free that's called Stress Prevention at Work Checkpoints. It's from the International Labor Organization, and it has 50 points, workplace stressors, and it describes them and gives you some ideas. For instance, for workload, quantitative demands, the one that I like is number 2, reduce unnecessary tasks such as control operations, writing reports, filling in forms, or registration work. Red tape. You know, we see that a lot in social services and healthcare. You know, people are trained to help people, and instead they're stuck behind desks filling out forms or on computers filling stuff out, and that's very frustrating for them because what they want to do is help people, and this is a barrier. Emotional demands, you might think, well, how do you deal with that? Well, the last one on this list is something very, very simple that I think could be implemented at very low cost. If something happens and you have an emotional crisis, just the ability to go somewhere quiet, lock the room, and just chill out for a while until you feel yourself gathered enough so you can go out and face the next crisis. Now, the people who designed this COPSUC survey had a number of soft guidelines. And I'm just going to go through a few of them. One of them is, and this one's really important, never start a survey unless there's a clear intention of doing something about it after you get the results. If you do a survey and you ask people to tell all about their psychosocial problems and their symptoms, and they're pouring out their hearts to you, and then you ignore them by not doing anything about it, you've made things worse than if you never did the survey yourself in the first place. So don't do a survey unless you're willing to do something. If you get below 60%, you haven't really engaged people. As I said before, you can still solve the problem for the squeaky wheels, and maybe, probably, the others will also benefit. When we use the stress assess, all the respondents are anonymous. You can't trace who said what unless in the comment section they mention people's name or their own name. But there are no standard solutions to problems. There's ideas that you can use, but you have to brainstorm and figure out how to fit it into your own. Hiring a psychologist to come in to try to solve your problems isn't going to work. You need to take whatever other people are telling you and figure out how to fit it into your organization. The other thing, you shouldn't use the results as a kind of slap on the wrist for management or for workers or whatever. It shouldn't be seen as a report card, but as a tool for dialogue. It's the beginning of a process. Now, are you ready to do it? There are 5 stages that I've kind of taken over from addiction work. And the first one is the organization even ready to recognize that it's a problem? Because if you're not ready, for instance, if a workplace has the attitude that stress in the workplace, well, I paid you, didn't I? I should get my money's worth out of you. They're in denial. They don't think it's a problem, and there's not much you can do there. Contemplation is when the wheels are turning, but they're not ready to do anything yet, but at least you've got them thinking about it. And then when they're ready, then they're committed to doing something, and then you do something. But once you change things, it's all great when you change things, everybody's happy and things like that, but let's say a few weeks later you get a layoff, and then the temptation is that you slip into your old pattern of behavior, and so you want to make sure that it sticks. So you want to test maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road to make sure that the change you made actually stuck. Now, how do you get people to do things? Well, you can use a baseball bat or you can use a carrot. And the costs are both. If you're going to ignore the problem, they're a stick, but if you're going to do something about it, they're a carrot. You can save $51 billion, or you can pay $51 billion. Risk. Do you want to read about your workplace in the newspaper? Like, that's the extreme. But even if you just have a sour attitude at work, that affects productivity, that affects quality, that affects a lot of things. So there's a risk to not looking at it. Legal liability. I didn't talk about this too much, but if you look up Martin Shane, he has a bunch of items online that show the development of the legal aspect of stress in the workplace, and he's showing that the trend is more and more responsibility being placed on the employer for the psychological health and safety in the workplace. Catherine Lepel also has articles along those lines. On the positive side, if you deal with stress in the workplace, keeping good workers and attracting new ones is a lot easier than if you're known to be a workplace that is very stressful. It's also, if excellence and sustainability is the buzzword in your organization, this is an example of it. And it's just the right thing to do. In 1983, I listened to James Ham, who was the headed the Royal Commission for the Safety in the Mines that created our Health and Safety Act here in Ontario. And I heard him say that law is the conscience of those who have none. And I thought, you know, that says it all. So since it says it all, I'll stop.